Okay, today we're taking a look at the RNAV RNP approach for runway 09 left in LASA. That's Zulu Uniform Lima Sierra. This is a custom-made approach for the airport. There are, from what I've heard, RNPAR approaches that are in use by some of the airlines like China Southern in several airports in Tibet, including Lhasa. And these are from seem quite hard to come by. I haven't actually found any official charts of them at all, so I decided I would try and make a similar approach to this. This approach comes with a document detailing the procedure, and I would highly suggest that anyone wanting to try to use this, read that. And of course, this is only for simulator use. For this, I'm flying my custom A320neo. It handles a little bit, or more or less like a 320, but it's slightly lower drag. So it is a little bit harder to decelerate, which I think is good for this test. I use a primarily 25-degree bank angle for the approach to make sure that even larger planes and faster planes can still perform it. And yeah, so we started the approach inbound Lima Sierra 184. This was from Lima Sierra 180. And as you can see, we're now decelerating to the 230 knot speed restriction for this waypoint. The speed and energy management of this approach is particularly important because you are flying at a high altitude, meaning that it's harder to bleed energy and it's harder to add energy. So making sure that you are at the right altitude, at the right speed, makes all the difference here, because if you do end up too fast, it becomes very hard to lose that speed. So the approach has built in a conservative glide slope. As you can see here, we turn into Lima Sierra 185. And along the VNAV descent path. I'm just going to speed up a little bit to skip some of the longer bits of the approach. So now we're reducing to 210 knots. This is not very strict for Lima Sierra 185. It's a more of a recommended speed, because you need to be 210 at 185, and then 180 at 186, Lima Sierra 186. So the 210 at 185 is more of a recommendation, because it does take some time to bleed off the speed, and that's meant to be taken into account in the vertical position of these waypoints. As you can see, almost at our 12 o'clock now is the airport. Obviously the advantage of this approach is because of this path, in the case of an engine failure, it is quite easy to continue the approach visually if needed. And in this case, we can go over this ridge in the case that we lose an engine, we can go over the ridge visually, and it allows us a steeper descent path, obviously, for considering that we don't have as much thrust available. So here we're almost 180 knots, and this part of the approach obviously takes a long time, and again it's because of the high altitude of the airport. As you can see, the terrain clearance in this part of the approach is quite large, but as we descend closer into the final part of the approach, it does get quite tight, and you need to ensure that the aircraft is flying within the margin of the track. And here we start approaching the base turn. In the base turn, we want to have at least one set of flaps out to provide a little bit of extra drag for the approach, and then it's noted as minimum practical speed. So especially in larger aircraft, you'll basically be in almost landing configuration at this point, but in a smaller aircraft like this, it doesn't matter as much. And then these last few turns at 160 knots, you can do them at up to about 165 knots with 25-degree bank angle, and you'll still get reasonable margins. But any faster than that, it becomes rather hard. Then 189. And the final part of the approach is on about a 2 to 2.5 degree glide slope. So again, we're keeping some more margins in terms of our deceleration needs. And here you can see we end up a little bit to the right of the runway, and that's corrected for. The PAFI indicator here is actually set to 3 degrees, which is obviously not aligned with the approach. And for some reason, when I flew this, the aircraft did not make the final turn onto Lima Sierra 191, which is the missed approach point, and towards the runway. So at that point, I manually took over and flew the plane. But you should be able to fly the approach all the way down to the minimum, the missed approach point, which is only 300 feet above the runway. So if you do have
approaching 09 left,
if you do have accurate altimeters, you can actually perform the approach down to a basically localizer performance. Alternatively, you'd use missed approach points on Lima Sierra 190. But it depends on the margins you have with your aircraft. And then the final bit of the approach is just like a normal landing. And it's not as tight as some other airports like Paro in Bhutan, for example, or Sion and Innsbruck, where you only have a very short final of perhaps 2 miles. Here we have a final of about 5 miles, which again gives us a little bit more margin. And other than that, that's it for the approach. So have a go with it. and you definitely need to know how to how your aircraft handles at these higher altitudes, because you do get a lot less time for deceleration, for acceleration, and for doing configuration changes. So it's definitely an approach that requires a prepared pilot, but when used correctly, it can obviously give us a lot of operational benefits from an airport like this, because we're not limited then to the localizer 27 right approach. So yeah, have a go with it, and see you in the next one.